We're joined from Johannesburg by Desmond Latham. He is an aviation journalist, and here in studio with me is Mwenda Mbijiwe. He's a former Kenya Air Force officer. Thank you so much to both of you for your time. Let's start with you, Mwenda. Of course, it's rather shocking, the story of how tragically this man has died as a stowaway on the airplane. But just try and help us understand how one might have attempted such a daring, move to another country, as it were, and how such a plan might have been executed.
Thank you. First of all, it's a very sad and shameful occurrence, emanating from our country. But again, in Africa, nothing is new. This is the same immigrant problem we are having in the north of Africa, where people are dying in the Mediterranean Ocean, trying to cross into Europe. Now, what happened here is someone truly lied to the security barrier at the airport. And there are many, theories as to how that happened. Maybe this was someone with an airport pass. This was a worker maybe at the airport or working at the cargo area and came to drop, say, luggage or say flowers or other things into the plane. Surely it must be someone who deceived the security barrier. Because I'll tell you, I've been to that airport many times. I work in private security sector, and I've never had the access there unless you're protected and guarded by police and other people. So this is someone who is an insider. This could not have been someone who came from the road and went into the plane. No, this is someone who had the access.
There's still a lot of questions, and of course what's very clear is that it is a very, very risky endeavor. Let's come to you, Desmond, in Johannesburg. Just considering the risk of, the conditions in an airplane that you're trying to be a stowaway on, and of course the risk associated with security at airports, how prevalent then is this issue of stowaways indeed here in Africa and other parts of the world?
Well, we've had cycles, and it's linked, as your other guest has said, to the growing pressures the country faces. South Africa's had 2 incidents in the last 3 years where 2 people were killed in the wheel bay of an aircraft coming from Nigeria into South Africa, for example. But most trying to fly or leave from, as your guest said, North Africa into Europe or America. The big thing here is that many landing strips and airlines operate from fairly isolated parts in cities. So there's, as you were talking about in that report, the FAA is saying that they know about from 1947 to 2015, 113 cases you mentioned. But we think that's a lot more because, of course, the wheel bay opens out and people drop out, and then it's an isolated area in the countryside somewhere. So it could be a bigger issue than we even expect.
And Mwenda, then coming back to you, then you've mentioned some of the security issues that are prevalent to this particular instance. In your view, just what are some of the major security lapses in this scenario, and how should the airport respond?
First of all, there is the access, the vetting of the people that have access to the airport. It's an international, it's an IATA practice, International Air Transport Agency, that all people working in international airports must undergo training and vetting. In this era of terrorism, and Kenya being in one of the countries in the region that have a lot of terrorism, we must vet who works at the airport. So there is failure even of the companies. Once it's investigated and this gentleman is known and which company he worked for, that company should be sanctioned. Number 2, there is the physical, check of the airplane. The Kenya Airways will be on the spot, and they are on the spot. How did this plane leave the ground without proper checks? Let's say this guy did not even get under the plane, in the wheel section. He planted a bomb in the wheel section, or he went in there and vandalized the electrical wires or the fuel passages in the plane. What would have happened if this plane had an electrical failure up there? So there is the physical check of the plane. They needed to be thorough at it. And finally, the coordination between the national security agencies, the police, the national intelligence at the airport, and the private security agencies there, particularly those working for Kenya Airways.
Absolutely.
Those are critical questions. They must be able to answer those questions.
Absolutely. There'll be a lot of attention on that in the days ahead.
Yes.
Coming back to you, Desmond, of course, in Johannesburg, you've been working as an aviation journalist. When you listen to the risks involved, how often have you come across a case where somebody has been a successful stowaway? And in that respect, then, what do managers of airports need to do to discourage people from even attempting such a risky journey?
Well, I mean, there are a few things. The first thing is the walk around of the aeroplane by the pilots, which they're doing. But the problem with these large airlines on the large planes is that in the wheel bay, there's a gap in an area which is very hard to get into. And so the pilot would actually have to climb into the wheel bay to see if there's anyone there. So that's not really feasible. What we're talking about is probably putting CCTV cameras in there. Already when you fly, you'll get a camera on the tail and a camera looking at the ground. There's talk now about putting cameras into the wheel wells so that the part of the checks on pilots is that they can actually see what's in there. And it's not just people stowing away. They've had animals, and we've had situations where birds have caused trouble in these wheel wells. So there's a move now by the manufacturers to actually insert cameras into these wheel wells, which will, of course, be a major move. Because if it's been tampered with by someone hiding there, then the pilot knows that there's a problem, and then there'll be a secondary check. Or the first case, they'll just be able to see whether or not someone's in there. So that's the first. But it's not as big a problem as, for example, on ships, which are a much bigger problem with these things. And of course, railways. So airlines have not really experienced the major difficulty with this. It's a terrible incident because you just imagine the body falling from the sky. And in the case you mentioned in Clapham, the body fell about a meter away from someone who was sunbathing. So that's, I mean, horrific. And our imagination runs wild. But it's actually over 50, 60 to almost 80 years of flying. To have 120 examples, official examples, is not a crisis.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for that insight. Desmond Latham joining us there from Johannesburg. And here in our studio with us is Mwenda Mbijiwe. Thanks very much to both of my guests.